This is a story about the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we live out in the world, and the space between those two. It's about how we love, how we lose, and how we recover, or not, through the stories we make up in our heads. I'm Robin Rice, and this is also my story. Chapter 3. Rivers, Songs, and the Beautiful Light. It has been said that the world is not made of atoms. It is made of stories. I say this depends on which world you are speaking of. Atoms make the outer world. Knock hard on something nearby to remind yourself if you have forgotten. Even if there is a breathtaking amount of empty space within each atom, as has been proven, they are remarkably solid in our everyday experience. Stories, on the other hand, make up our inner world. They are also the connective tissue between your world and mine. However much we might wish to make them solid, they are not. They're soft, malleable, ever shape-shifting, and hopefully never told the same way twice. When allowed to ebb, flow, meander, and wish-wash their way through our days, stories are how we make sense of ourselves and our lives. Storytelling, then, has the potential to become an art form. Like all art, it's far from nice and neat, especially given how we have to account for so many things in our story world. The stories we tell others, the stories we ignore or push down and away, the stories we forget, the many intertwining stories, the caveats, the flashbacks, and the foreshadowing. Also, those facts and fictions that help us build bridges between every little thing that happens to us. For the 10,000 things the Buddhists say make up our material world, I say there are 10x 10,000 stories to sort out in our heads, hearts, and guts. Additionally, in our attempt to pin things down and solidify them as much as possible, we tend to believe our stories far more than is warranted. Most stories do have truth in them, of course, at least for us. But if the academic research is at all correct, we can reasonably assume our stories are a cocktail of facts mixed with embellishments and outright fabrications. Only some of a story's details are something like what actually happened. The rest is pulled from memory and imagination. As our stories are rehashed in our heads and repeated out loud to others, what stories have you been telling on loop, I wonder? We think we are making them solid, and so believe we are making ourselves more solid. Yet even here they morph, strangely and automatically becoming subtly and then grossly in line with what we expect and have always expected. While the present moment is the only one in which any story can be truly alive, catch it if you can, the most important and impactful stories are those that have taken root in us, living on inside our psyches for better and for worse, long after we have forgotten how they got there. They live and breathe, much like a dormant volcano, only seemingly benign. This brings me to Queen Maeve's tomb and what I have come to call Story Mountains. Maeve was the warrior queen of Connacht in Celtic mythology, and her final resting place is in Sligo, Ireland. At 1,014 feet high by last measure, her tomb only just qualifies as a mountain, yet it dominates the landscape to the west. Assembled one stone at a time by pilgrims over 5,000 plus years, the pile now weighs in the neighborhood of 40,000 metric tons. Tradition has it that one must never climb to the top without taking a stone to contribute to the pile. Pilgrims are known to climb up and down even in Ireland's biting wind and hard pouring rain. I can attest to this. I have seen them. This keeps the mound growing and Maeve's story alive. Some say the pull is from the queen herself, wanting to be remembered. I suggest we ought not discount that stories have a life of their own, and a reach as strong as any I know. Like contributors to Maeve's tomb, we create our personal story mountains one telling at a time. We build them stone by stone, trip after trip, until, without notice, they become so unwieldy, we have no choice but to see that we have become our stories. Armed with flimsy yet firm-seeming evidence of our truths, our identities grow. When the world appears to confirm them further, also stone by stone, we forget that we are storytelling artists. We become sure our stories are true and willing to defend them as such. We stand by them even if that stance costs us. We dedicate ourselves to the truth of them through any country's biting wind and hard-pouring rain. In doing so, we become locked in a grave of our own making. My personal story mountain of death, and being the cause of death, was solidly in place before I had my first double-digit birthday. Fortunately, though, there was occasional respite, and a few beautiful stones were beginning to pile up alongside the troubling ones. Enter the labyrinth. I have no idea what shifted me from being a 9-year-old terrified of having dirt on her hands to an 11-year-old who adored going into the woods to play knee-deep in the creek, alone. I do recall noticing that shift, though, and being proud of myself for it. Was this growing up? I felt like I was falling in love, but not with some handsome Henry-like boy as expected. I was in love with feelings of wonder and vitality, the kind that only nature can invoke, awakening to sensuality through her colorful sights and sounds. People not allowed, I murmured to myself. The only stories I would entertain were the ones I made up in my head. There was no shortage of ideas and, being alone, no need for them to be held to any reasonable standard of truth. I had all the time in the world to set my thoughts, ideas, and imagination straight inside of me. Then, as now, I wasn't overly committed to surface facts, so much as to deeper truths. My many, mostly tumultuous feelings were purified through the clear creek water and grounded in the earthy banks, especially where the tree roots had broken through. Looking up, I could see the great saturation and luminosity of chroma that made up our ever-changing Midwestern seasons. Looking down, it was dark and dank, wet and mossy. I almost felt guilty, as if I were catching a hidden peek at nature's private parts. Later in life, I would find myself saying things like, "A river without banks is a flood," or repeating the old wisdom that you can never step in the same river twice. The river will always be different, as will you. I was getting ready to publish my 4th work of fiction before I realized that I had put a river goddess in each novel. Funny where things start and how much earlier than we might expect. School was a never-ending torture, no exaggeration. But I was content in my silent, solo stream life after school and on weekends. Summer was pure freedom. It was liberating to not have to tell anyone where I was going or when I would be back. My parents were both working now and rarely at home. We had moved farther out into the country, with my parents finding enough success to get us through the door of a brand new, larger, and very expensive house. I had overheard that we moved to help me get over Nell. In retrospect, I think they were also afraid of how attached I was becoming to the Bowders. But whatever part of their reasoning had to do with me, I knew the real reason we moved. This house and land and pond and river were my mother's dream. Having grown up on a farm with nearby woods, she finally felt at home again, even though it put a financial noose around the family neck. I snuck out to the river when I was sure no brothers or neighbors were looking, always afraid someone would stop me for reasons I can't imagine now. I acted like I was just meandering toward the back of our long yard. Then, once beyond the tree line, I made a run for it. Desperately fleeing nearly half a mile along the riverside path, I would find my special spot and know, at least for a time, that I was safe from other humans and, much more important, they from me. Rolling my pant legs up even when the months grew colder, I drank in the scent of moist earth, sought out the smallest of nature's tiny worlds. Moss, what a glorious thing! And waded barefoot without worry. I found the thrill of discovery in every broken shell and water-softened rock. It was as delicious as a secret should be. Most peculiar, though, I noticed myself watching myself, as bewildered by the maturation taking place in me as I believed anyone would have been, had they noticed. They didn't, even when my breasts grew to an early, excessive size. Only 11 years old, I had not been warned to expect this, so I hid them for as long as I could, which ended up being more than a year. With no one telling me who I was supposed to be, I was free to see myself becoming myself. I thought about it a lot. I was not yet aware of being aware, but this first awareness was plenty enough fodder for contemplation. I am becoming someone, I thought. Did others not see this happening? If not to me, then at least to themselves. Did others not know about this transformation? That we have someone inside of us, talking, having ideas, wanting some things, and not wanting others. I could only guess that they didn't. Wouldn't they talk about it if they did? Wouldn't everyone want to understand this wonder inside? Well, I suppose it was enough to know it myself. Having something precious of my own for what felt like the first time, I decided to keep this inner life secret for as long as I could, which ended up being a lot more than a year. Many days in the woods, I found myself singing a song I had caught in bits and pieces on the radio until I had learned it all the way through. Seasons in the Sun seemed to have been written just for me. Well, for me and Nell. It made me sad, but somehow it was sad in a good way, which was confusing, but also pleasing. I sang it aloud again and again. Goodbye to you, my trusted friend. We've known each other since we were 9 or 10. I would climb the creek bank as I sang, trying to imagine myself in the song. I had no idea why, only that the urge to participate in the song was coming from somewhere inside of me. I could feel it, like something pushing on me from the inside out. First, the urge to sing, then the urge to climb with the song, get my body in on it. Finally, the urge to cry. Pushing my legs hard against the steepest part of the bank until they burned somehow made the crying easier. Or maybe just more thorough. It was like finding a stick that allowed me enough reach to scratch the part of my back where my fingers couldn't get to. With this song, I did not feel so alone. Someone else had lost someone and felt it as deeply as I did. They must have to write a whole song about it and get it on the radio. And it was not someone very old who had died, or so I assumed from the lyrics. An untimely death, I imagined and appreciated. Finally, someone was singing rather, of saying goodbye and needing to say goodbye, which I never had a chance to do with Roxanne, Nell, or Joanne. It was a phenomenal relief to imagine I had that moment with each of them, though Nell was who I sang to on repeat. The song was a perfect pit for my sorrow. I would throw all of my emotion into it. In doing so, though I had no way of knowing it, I was taking one stone after another off my mountain of grief. Goodbye, my friend, it's hard to die. These particular words were not sung but choked out. Sometimes no sound came. To even say the word die was to admit what had happened. I wasn't always up for that. Each attempt to sing rewounded me, bringing up tears and some days shoulder-racking sobs. I watched myself sobbing and afterward noticed I felt better. Even if my parents and other adults could not or would not help me, this song came to me like a gift. It was Nell-level perfect. Repeat after repeat, deep scratch after deeper scratch, something inside of me was moving. Then, one day, something moved me even further. This, though, so far as I know, was not initiated by me. It was October, the leaves bursting in burnt yellows, fiery oranges, and boldened reds. The sun was peeking through a particularly large and lovely sugar maple. I remember the leaves were huge as I walked the path back home. Oddly, the light looked different on this particular day. It had a strange, warm, sparkling, and highly potent glow. It felt like some kind of invitation. I didn't know what I was being invited to, but that was the sensation. I lay down under the branches, acutely aware that this was more than a usual tree and a usual light on a usual day. I was curious, ready even, for something to happen. I pressed my back solidly against the earth to get a longer, better look at the sparkling. Marveling at the flickering presence, in seconds I felt lifted into the treetop, then beyond. Strangely, I lost time. Rather, I had a moment, several moments more likely, but I could not say for sure, when it felt like time did not exist. Without time, let me tell you, we are as light as a leaf. No past, no future, not even the present to weigh us down. Back then, I could never have conceptualized it as such, let alone given it language. But I did know that I had experienced something new. Light. Timeless light. It was not a what or a who or a when or a why. It was something outside of all of those. And it felt right and good and true, even obvious in some way. Like, of course time does not exist. How silly that anyone would think it does. I might have dismissed it only as a spontaneous passing moment, but something in me was decidedly changed when I stood up. At first, I had no idea what, but I knew something had happened. I floated more than ran home, high with the energy of light that had descended upon me. I flew even faster than when I flew in my dreams. I burst into the house, speaking a mile a minute about how time did not exist and how light was a marvel. No one was there, so I spoke to the dishes, the chair, the pink frost-colored shag carpet in my bedroom. Why not act crazy if life was so crazy that time did not exist? I finally cornered my white Angora cat, Kiki, who had been hiding under the bed, and made her listen. My 2 years of near silence were broken. From then on, and for years to come, I would be known as the kid who simply could not stop talking. About anything, about everything, all the time. On the bus, in class, after school, on Saturdays. It didn't matter where or when or why. No one even needed to be listening. Any topic was fair game, and I was not in the least interested in filtering my thoughts. I would ponder, imagine out loud, sing, swear, lie, or oops, tell my deepest, darkest secrets, and sometimes those of others. It felt involuntary. Like eating a whole family-size bag of chips, which was my favorite guilty pleasure. After that day, I would often lose time. How often, I'm not sure, as I didn't think it important enough to track. nor was I aware if others did or did not lose time. And I was only sometimes aware it had happened. I could enter the bathroom for a hot bath and come out 3 hours later, freezing cold. I'd sit in a chair for hours and hours until my mother insisted I move from the window, because it had become dark and the neighbors would talk if they saw me sitting motionless for too long. Having no words to describe it, what happened under that tree went unnamed, yet was never forgotten. All I knew was that now, finally, life was alive in me the same way I had recognized it in Roxanne and Nell. Because of this, I was sure, absolutely positively positive, that something wonderful was always about to happen. It was expected that something, anything, powerful and brilliant could occur at any time. Yes, any moment now, life was going to burst wide open. For all its ugly hell so far, the beauty of life had finally broken through. Enter your labyrinth at BeWhoYouAre.com.